So, Christian, we're here
Hi.
at NAMM
That's right.
in the beautiful smoking garden.
Yes, in Anaheim, which people like who have not been to Anaheim, I say Anaheim is to LA what Croydon is to London.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I
Yeah, but the sun is shining today. At
Yes.
least yesterday, this wouldn't have happened.
Yes,
We
absolutely.
would have been under an umbrella, which might have been an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So you're here with Spitfire Audio.
I am indeed, yes.
Massive stand, big presence, very successful.
Yeah, it's going really well, yeah.
And the purpose of the Meet and Makers series is really just to kind of rewind and kind of
Sure.
understand where you came from. I understand right back in the beginning you were kind of more of a drum and bass producer, EDM.
Yes,
I hate
kind
to use that phrase.
Well, it wasn't called it then. So it was called drum and bass, first wave, intelligent drum and bass, people like LTJ Bookham. And I also used to engineer for the freestylers, people like that, Strike, that kind of thing, yeah.
Right.
And I think my programming chops gained some interest from composers. So I started programming drums for the likes of Anne Dudley. And inadvertently kind of looked at what they were doing and went, I've always wanted to be a film composer. And the reason why I didn't think I was going to become a film composer actually is tied in with the Spitfire project, which we'll probably get to.
So, so you're not, are you a classically trained musician?
No, I learned the piano, and then I found the whole process of taking exams incredibly stressful. So I kept on playing the piano. But I started writing music when I was very young, from about 5 years old. And when I was 15, they started teaching me how to write music, and they were telling me that I was doing it wrong. So I kind of flunked out and went, that's it, my dream of being a film composer is over, because you can't write orchestral music without knowing the chops and going to music school and all of this kind of stuff.
Apparently. But
Apparently,
we know that's not true.
Well, I know now, and we didn't have the internet in those days, so there was no way of me finding out that Hans Zimmer might not be a great, musical theoretician, if you know what I mean. So I think inadvertently what I've done is over the last 20 years is use technology to kind of get rid of that issue, really, that was at the heart of my kind of heritage.
Well, it's interesting because, I guess things started, you'd be creating your own workflows and your own ways of utilising the technology of the day.
Absolutely.
Did that start with making your own sample sets, or was it in other fields as well?
Yeah, I think that I was always interested in computers. So I used to have a BBC Model B and used to program, you had to program sequence of languages in those days. But I've always been very much a fan of being a soundsmith. And I think it derives from, in that era, my Casio CZ1000, my first synth, it only had 14 presets, so you had to make your own. And so that kind of, I think, piqued my interest, really.
And I guess if you were doing that stuff around that time, it wasn't really so much about analog synthesis and kind of hands-on control of that. It was like parameter access and programming.
Absolutely.
Painting the hall through the letterbox.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, analog synths were really not cool at that point. It was about making a really realistic, bright-sounding piano sound, yeah.
Yes, we remember those
You
classics.
remember those,
the classic. It's funny, isn't it? Do you still get that time when you hear it and you go, my goodness, that's an O1W?
Yes, oh God, yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
So, how did you get sort of into the kind of Spitfire domain from where you were?
Well, I was writing film scores and I was using the kind of commercial libraries that were available at the time. And I was always really perplexed by the sounds. I used to listen to this one particular guitar sound. I'd listen to it and I'd go, this is brilliantly recorded, but who wants it to sound like this unless you're Mick Hucknall? That's probably really rude. But,
no,
but do you know what I mean? There was a kind of Sting style, kind of just pureness to it that I didn't get. It wasn't my thing. And then the more I analysed it, the more I looked into how people recorded samples, it became clear to me that people recorded samples differently from music. And I just thought, I'm going to try to record a sample set that is recorded like I record music. So I bought this charango, which I can't play because I'm not a guitarist, and I got my brother, who's a bass player, to play it, and I said, play each note differently. And he went, well, that's not how you make samples. They're all meant to be the same. I went, no, play each note differently, make some mistakes, I'm going to take them all. And I put it together in EXS24, and immediately it was the best sample I'd ever used in my life. And that was my spark.
So essentially you get that kind of randomness.
It's part of a performance. So the way I put it is, we record samples like you record music. It's like recording a film score one note at a time. That's how we.
And I suppose the thing is then you have round robin and key switching and all those things. So how do you decide which mistakes to put on which which layers?
Well, we tend to build them with warts and all, and then we kind of reverse ourselves back until it starts sounding like a synth. And it really is very obvious the minute you just clean it too much, and it starts sounding like a synth. And the engineer's forever going, oh, we need to rewind. I'm like, no, I love a chair squeak from here and there. So
I mean, I suppose that's a really interesting aspect. I mean, because then you get more of an emotional connection, because
Absolutely.
the ear is incredibly sensitive to repetition, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. It's incredible. But the whole thing from that spark went to me being banned from a leading sampleware manufacturer's forum, and Paul noticed it and found me on MySpace. The only good thing MySpace I think has ever done for me, anyway. And we went and had a pint in the pub and decided to experiment on, taking the Chirango experiment and doing it with an orchestra.
So how did you get to that? I mean, because obviously, funding the recording of an orchestra when you're having a punt and you haven't got that kind of thing. I mean, how did you do that? Was it kind of like, oh, let's just put our life savings in here and see what we can get? Or was it just, how did you...
Basically, we had a kind of a hand-to-mouth approach. So I was earning money. In fact, my entire kind of film career was supported by my earnings from library music. So I had a track that was doing really well, and I said, well, if we can go into the hall and get this done quickly, then I'll call up Harry Gregson Williams, because I've done some programming for him. I'm sure he'd be up for this. And that's how we started. We started with just a very small group of A-listers. So we didn't have to build a company and a marketing infrastructure and all of that. It was just calling up mates going, do you want some cool samples? And so I would say for the first 2 years, there was 30 users. And it was a kind of private, bespoke thing.
And I imagine the other thing about it is obviously the way that you record, particularly the Tundra library, where you're recording really very quiet things. I mean, I guess the technology has enabled you to actually work at those lower dynamic ranges, because, I mean, the noise previous, if you were working to tape, it would have been impossible.
Well, this is what was central to my kind of argument about sampling. Going back 10 years, it seemed that samples were made by tech companies who were interested in going, we need the purest raw materials, and then you can use technology to recreate reality. And I just flipped it on and said, let's get technology to do the really boring stuff, which is number crunching and reducing noise floors. And so that's our approach. But also, Tundra I think is a very good example of something that's, just a creative and fun approach to sampling, and that you feel there's joy in the process. There isn't a stagnant kind of laboured feel to it.
And I guess that must reflect on how the musicians do it, because I mean, I guess when an orchestra or a bunch of people, string players or whatever, are hired in for a sample session, they probably think, oh God, this is going to be so regimented. There's a bit of that. There's fun. We keep it light. We move it on. But I don't really like boasting about this, because it's just how it should be, in my opinion. But when we decided to go in and record our first orchestra, I said to my business partner, my grandfather founded Actors Equity, so I'm a union boy. So we're going to pay them top whack, which you have to anyway, but we're also going to pay them royalties off sales. So we now have a royalty distribution of over 300 people every 6 months, which our financial controller, it's a real headache, but it's fundamental to our business that the musicians feel that sampling is part of the music industry. It's not a side tech industry that kind of saps off it. Right, and I guess if they're being asked to do sort of interesting and exciting and fun things, then they put more emotion into it themselves as well.
Absolutely. I think the thing they find the hardest actually is physically holding the instruments up for that long, particularly trumpeters, because they'll sit there for 64 bars and go blah, 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 and then put their trumpets down. But it's like holding that up for 3 hours is quite tricky. But the other thing I think is quite funny is because I'm still a working film composer, I'm aware of the kind of curious zeitgeist that you get stylistically. And so we'll often ask musicians to play in ways they might not be common for them, and they suddenly go, I'm going to be doing this for the next 10 years now, this kind of style. So when we did Tundra, they were all looking through the glass going, we're just going to be playing with the backs of our bows for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I suppose that...
You kind of set the zeitgeist off.
Well, I mean, that's the other interesting thing, because, I mean, I've seen some of your videos where you're talking through, like, the mix process of a particular session, showing how you're processing them, blending real strings and blending your strings and orchestral instruments. And the detail and the stuff, I mean, the amount of just sheer operational knowledge and production knowledge it takes to process all of those individual instruments. I mean, that's sort of mind-blowing. I mean, are you conscious that you're able to put that all in? I mean, is that something that's all your knowledge, or do you have a team that help you build all of that stuff?
Well, I mean, from a production point of view, it's just something that I've learnt over the years, and it's like watching Anne Dudley work, watching Harry Gregson Williams work, picking it up. And so establishing and evolving a workflow. And it's very interesting. Sometimes I meet other composers and it's like, oh, we have the same workflow. And it's like, we've evolved, there's a kind of singularity. And then sometimes you meet a composer and you go, you do it that way. That's nuts. But as for the technical side of things, I'm very embarrassed to say that I've never programmed anything in Kontakt. I don't know how to put these things together. We have, I think this is a key to Spitfire's recent story, is that we have the most amazing team in the world who have created the tools from scratch to make these things. And there is a passion and a joy that I'm so honoured to be involved in. You know, and it's not something I've whipped into them. They have a real love of what we're doing because it's different, you know.
So I'm guessing, I mean, if you go back to your film score work and, you know, your soundtrack work, I mean, how on earth do you fit it all in? Because it's a very time-consuming and, you know, meticulous process, right?
Yeah, there was a point where I was doing as much work as a composer and then running the company, and it did become troublesome. And I basically came to a kind of a crossroads in my life where I had to basically look at Spitfire and realise it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's these things don't happen to everyone, and it happened to me, so I had to go with it. And what I'm able to do, which I think is quite an affluent thing now, is I just pick and choose really lovely people to work with.
That's really fortunate because, I mean, I know many composers work, you know, 24/7 because this sort of fear drives you in the sense that I might not get that work if I don't say yes this time.
And it does happen, you know, if you don't, that director you build a relationship with, if you go, listen, I'm too busy, they'll go and find someone else and develop a new relationship, and then at the pub they'll promise them the next gig. It does happen. So.
It's funny, isn't it, that there's, for all the kind of assurity and the confidence that is outward facing from our industry, ultimately everybody's really insecure and sort of worried about change in many ways as well.
Yes, I would agree. I think composers fall... I don't know, I think filmmakers fall into two categories. I think there is the deeply kind of paranoid, insecure, and then there's raging narcissists. And I think that composers seem to get the brunt of the NPDs. So I wasn't great with those guys. So I'm now being very selective. I've got what I call a nardar, and I'm very good at spotting a narcissist. And I just will often sometimes walk off a job quite early on because I know it's going to be different. Yeah, the way I define it is if you walk into a room feeling okay about yourself and walk out feeling worse about yourself, you've probably been subject to a narcissistic attack. So. And the film industry seems to be a magnet for them, so yeah.
Yeah, I suppose so. So where do you see things going? Because obviously, I mean, the palette you've got to play with, and, you know, the boundaries that you're pushing, certainly with the last sample library, you know, what is it that where are you wanting to go with this? Because, I mean, is there a finite?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, I think probably answer that question in two parts, if I may. Firstly, I think I was working on a really terrible TV show called Sinbad. I don't mind saying it. It was awful. And I was just absolutely caning up to 20 minutes of music a day writing, and we were never going to use a band. It was just the samples. And then just got to a point where I go, I love that C. I love it. I love that cello, Consordino C. I just want a different one. I want it to sound exactly like that one, but I just want a different moment in time. And I think, as I was mentioning earlier, the kind of zeitgeist changes. But I think that we've stumbled across a kind of a mission statement at Spitfire now, which is going to take us on through the next 10 years. And for me, it is about the experience that I've had of being end of the 20th century, snobbery, you've got to go to music college, you've got to read music, you've got to write atonal, 12-tone. To technology enabling me to work with orchestral musicians. And I think that what Spitfire really wants to do is to enable a generation of people to consider orchestral, even if they haven't been to music college and can't read the viola clef.
And I mean, also the thing is with all of those, you can force via the instruments an orchestra to do things that, you know, they would never necessarily consider. I mean, do you find that you're hearing people using things in really unusual ways?
Yes, and I think that's what makes it interesting, because I think that some people write what I would refer to as hybrid style scores. We had Charlie Clouser on our stand exhibiting the finest quality of the hybrid kind of score, and that's the romance of sampling, is you can take that tremolo violin and tune it down 36 tones, and it still sounds like something human, but something completely mutated, which is fun. But also, you know, I think that what we try to do with our samples is to help inform people how to write. If you're going to use a live band, you know, these are some kind of restrictions that are actually quite helpful. And that's something that we're looking into doing more and more of, is imparting our advice of, for example, we recorded a contrabass trombone and we said, okay, full FFF, the lowest note, go, you know, for a bar and a half. And he went, I'll give you 2 beats. And he literally went, "Boop." And we said, is that it? He went, that's a full lung. And he said, whatever you do, don't loop this, because I'll get into the next session and I'll see footballs across the stage. And it's obviously, well, where do I take a breath? Because I need to take a breath every 2 beats. You know,
maybe there's some kind of artificial pump system that people could use. Yeah. And you could have like robotic lips at the pump. So
well, actually, to quote Samuel Adler in his orchestration book, is the contrabass trombone is far too difficult to play, so I advise you don't orchestrate for it.
I mean, having said that, there are the extreme ends of the spectrum in the orchestra. There's some really interesting instruments, like you say, the contrabass, absolutely. And those enormous super sub-bass saxophones. Always fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that's been brilliant about the kind of work that Hans Zimmer has done, kind of inventing orchestral sampling, and is that I think we're discovering instruments that haven't been used. So the cimbasso appears on all of his scores, and that's kind of a really rare used instrument. I think most people also think when they hear on film scores they're hearing an oboe. It's never an oboe, it's always a cor anglais, because they sample better. So directors go, I want an oboe. So you put an oboe and go, oh, that doesn't sound right. It's like, oh, you mean a cor anglais. So you have these kind of film music tropes, if you will. You know?
Yeah, well, that's really, because you get the same thing when you say, like, I need to sample some running water for something, and you know, because you think you want this little burbling. I mean, it just always sounds like a toilet flushing. You have to make it sound like what you think it should sound.
Absolutely, there are certain contrivances that you take when sampling. Absolutely, yeah.
So, what's next?
Well, I think that I'm allowed to say that it's been a really great honour to work with Eric Whittaker on our first choir library, and he really sums up certainly my personal aesthetic, you know, the British style, even though he's from Las Vegas, the British style of very little vibrato, singing quietly. So I'm really hoping that we will adjust the attitudes that composers take with choirs, of the kind of, okay, there's a picture of heaven, whip out the Gregorian patch, that they're another department in the orchestra, if you will.
And of course, you've got all that articulation that is, you know...
Absolutely. Yeah. And the choristers that we have in Britain match and equal the quality of the musicians who I think are the best, certainly the best sight readers in the world, but if not the best musicians as well. So that's a real honour. And we've been working very closely with the Bernard Herrmann estate to create a Bernard Herrmann library, which is going to be along soon. And I think the thing I want to say about that is it's taking his aesthetic and hopefully offering that up as a new modern tool. It's not going to be a retro kind of thing. But it's our 10th anniversary year this year, so we've not kind of announced that it's our birthday, but we will be soon, and it's going to be a bumper year. There's lots of really crazy stuff coming.
Christian, happy birthday.
Thanks very much.
And thanks for joining us.
No, it's a real pleasure. Thank you.